and we will be sending out the video to all who registered and everyone who attended the webinar. We'll also be sharing the slides, so don't try to frantically write down any links. We will today send the recording and the slides to everyone who attended and registered for the webinar. My name is Lenny Teytelman. I am the CEO and co-founder of Protocols.io. There are 3 scientists on the Protocols team, and we alternate who does the webinars. So today it's my pleasure to lead this. We are going to do about half an hour of just the general mission of Protocols.io and a quick overview of the key functionality of the platform. And then there will be plenty of time for questions. I'll unmute folks, but you can also type your questions into the chat or the Q&A part of Zoom. And as I said, my name is Lenny. I'm a geneticist and computational biologist by training, and it was actually my postdoc experience. After I left Berkeley, I came to MIT, and the first year and a half of my postdoc literally went into correcting just one step of a previously published technique in single-cell microscopy. So instead of a microliter of a chemical, I needed 5. Instead of an incubation for 5 minutes, I needed to be 15. And a year and a half later, that tweak, you realize it's not a new technique. It's a correction of something that's previously published. So it's not a new paper. I don't get credit for it. But more importantly, everyone else who is using the same method is either getting completely misleading single-cell results or has to spend a year or 2 rediscovering that little tweak. And that's the seed behind my obsession with creating a central place that makes it easy to exchange method details as we do the work long before we're publishing, and then improving reproducibility as we publish, and ensuring that there is a place we can come back to share these corrections and optimizations. So these are the key things we'll touch on during the introductory webinar. And as I said, for those who are joining a little bit late, as I said, we're recording this, we'll share the slides and the video, and I'll do a tour of Protocols.io and our mission for the first 30 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And I like to start my sob story aside. I always like to start my talk with a tweet from a postdoc, former postdoc at UC Riverside, who said, "I'm looking for a protocol in a 97 paper, as described in 96, finds 96 paper, as described in 87. 87 paper is paywalled even at University of California," and that's a common and very frustrating experience. This is from a biologist, similarly from a physicist. Devices were fabricated as previously described, and the original reference says devices were fabricated with conventional methods. And I have a long thread where I've bookmarked over the years, I've bookmarked complaints like this. It would take us a full hour just to go through those tweets. Obviously we won't, but it's a very common problem. It's not specific to the life sciences or to biology and physics. It's a general problem with research methods. And the last thing about the motivation and the context that I think is important to highlight is the experience of the 2015 initiative between Center for Open Science and Science Exchange, which was called the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project. And that was a $1.5 million initiative to just independently replicate key experiments in 50 papers from top journals on cancer. And what was the key takeaway from the initiative? There's a lot of media coverage on this in 2017. One of my favorites was this is a quote from an article by Ed Young around this effort in 2017, which said, "The hardest part by far was figuring out exactly what the original labs actually did. Scientific papers come with method sections that theoretically ought to provide recipes for doing the same experiments, but often those recipes are incomplete, missing out important steps, details, or ingredients. In some cases, the recipes are not described at all. Researchers simply cite an earlier study that used a similar technique. And what's interesting about this whole initiative is that a year later, it just wound down at 18 out of the 50 papers, to a large part because it was so hard to figure out exactly what was done in a particular paper. And it's not just about the published papers lacking the details. The key issue that this highlights, the Center for Open Science and Science Exchange that were doing this project, they actually went to the original labs that published the papers and collaborated with them and tried to figure out exactly what was the protocol in your paper. And the labs themselves had a very hard time and couldn't provide the precise protocols, even though they described the methods. The person who did the work is not there. The person might still be there, but doesn't remember exactly which version of the protocol they used. And even when the lab notebooks are available, it's really hard to reverse engineer what exactly was done a year ago or 3 years ago or even 5 months ago. And this is the part that I want to stress that Protocols.io tries to improve. It's not just about the published paper, but it's long before, as we're doing the research, having a central place that makes it easy to capture all of these details and share them with your company, with your laboratory. Doesn't matter if you're in industry or academia, it's the same challenge. So it's the internal reproducibility of the research group, and then the external reproducibility of a paper that you publish if you're in academia that we're trying to improve. Sorry, I didn't mean to click that link. Just a second. And so our mission, as I said, is to make it easy to share details before, during, and after publication. I'll go through, these are the last slides, this and next one, I think, just a handful of slides, and I'll switch to a live demo of the platform, and then we'll do the Q&A. But to summarize, there are two sides that we're trying to address in terms of our mission: the external reproducibility of a published paper, and long before that, the internal reproducibility. So there is an open access public site of protocols.io that lets you get credit for your research methods and makes it easier to publish. And that's completely open access. It's free to read, free to publish, CC BY license. So that's the open access repository with over 12,000 public protocols since we launched in 2014. We've grown to over 12,000 public protocols. And then the paid part is that allows us to be sustainable, and that's the business model behind protocols.io. The paid part is the private collaborative use of protocols.io inside organizations and research teams in academia and industry. And there's over 40,000 private methods. There are over 114,000 registered users that have accounts on protocols.io. And obviously with the public repository, there's over 1 million people, 1 million scientists that visit annually without registering, without signing in, just to consume the knowledge that's on protocols.io. And we'll go through the key functionality and demo that in just a second. But before I do that, I also want to say that when it comes to the academic world, if you're publishing, there are hundreds and hundreds of journals that actually have protocols.io and author guidelines and recommend putting in links from your method sections that link to protocols.io. When we go into the live demo, I'll say more about that. There are more and more funders that recommend or require protocols.io. And since 2019, there's an increasing number of universities and government organizations that have a site license for protocols.io that makes protocols.io, if you're on campus at a university, makes it free, both not just for the public use, but also for the private collaborative use, for teaching or research method organization. And I'll say a few words for those of you who are coming from an institution that have a site license. I'll say a few words about some of the benefits that comes with in the live demo part, and I'll show how to find whether your organization has a site license to protocols.io and if you can upgrade to premium through that. So with that, we'll switch over to protocols.io itself. I'm going to demo some of the key benefits functionally of the platform. Obviously, there is a lot in protocols.io. We're not going to be able to go through all of it in 30 minutes or 20 minutes that I have left for the live demo part, but we have webinars specifically on publishing. We have webinars on advanced use of protocols.io. If you're already familiar, this is a more introductory webinar just to give an overview, but there's a lot of really good functionality in the editor, in the collaborative features. You don't have to, if you go to the welcome page and scroll down, you don't have to wait for a webinar. So you can go to the webinars page and that's here, and you can see what's coming up this next month. We have regularly scheduled webinars from introductory to advanced, but you don't have to wait for the webinars. We also have several monthly drop-in clinics, which are like office hours. You can just drop by and ask a question. These are regularly scheduled. And if you don't want to wait for those, in terms of resources, there is the one-on-one demos, again, from the footer or the help page. You can navigate, and we have links to this in the slides as well. You can navigate to request a demo, and any week you can find a slot and jump on a call with our scientists or customer support and go over specific features of the platform if you're going beyond the introductory part that we're focusing on today. And I am going to be showing one of the public protocols for this demo, but it's important to note that there is industry, FDA is using protocols.io, and so we do take security and privacy very seriously. Every protocol that you create starts out privately by default. You decide who to share it with, when to share, what permissions to give them, and if and when it's appropriate, you can publish your protocols and get credit for that, but obviously everything starts out privately. And in this example, what you'll see if you're scrolling through a protocol is that it's not just a static PDF. These are dynamic and interactive protocols. So you can mouse over any step, click plus to ask a question that will go to the authors, to the contact on the protocol, and to everyone who has it bookmarked, everyone who is using the method. And you can see, for example, in this protocol on step 7, we can take a look. There are discussions right on step level. And obviously, if your protocol is private, these are private conversations that are happening. But on a public protocol, what this allows you to do is to ask a question on a step or on the protocol, and you can see there are 38 comments on the previous version of this protocol. There are 43 comments on this version. People will sometimes post an image saying, this is what I'm seeing, and these are the correct results, and you have sort of a public FAQ that starts to grow on top of your protocol instead of answering the same question over and over by email. And as these conversations happen, the authors can easily version the protocol. And you can see we're now looking at version 2. So each one, this is a public protocol, so each one gets a DOI. The previous version doesn't disappear, but we guide everyone naturally to the newest version. And under the title, there is a compare button that allows you to quickly see between the different versions which steps are the same, which ones have changed, very quickly. And versioning aside, obviously the versioning in terms of the interactivity of the protocols, the versioning is up to the authors and co-administrators on the protocol. I cannot come in and change your technique for obvious reasons. But every protocol essentially serves as a template. So there is a copy fork button that allows you to take someone's protocol and create your own private version of it as you use it in your research team. So if you work with crickets and I work with grasshoppers, or you're doing liver research and I'm doing kidney research, we might have slight variations, or depending on the equipment that I have in my laboratory, there is variation on how we perform the experiments. And so I can take your protocol, click copy fork, and that gives me a private copy of your method. Then I am able to edit it, change individual steps as needed, and if I'm ready to share, I can make a fork public as well, saying we essentially followed this protocol, but here are the specific things that we changed. And that compare functionality that I was just showing between the versions, it also works between forks, and we try to make it very clear who are the original authors and to give credit to both the people sharing the optimizations in the fork and the original authors of a technique. And finally, in terms of protocol level functionality, finally, I wanted to highlight this run button. And this is relevant specifically for wet lab and field methods when you're doing hands-on work. About 5 to 10% of those 12,000 public protocols that we have are computational, but the rest are hands-on methods. And for those, the run button allows you, kind of like a cooking checklist app, allows you to step through the experiment as you're doing it. So I'm on step 1, now I'm on step 2. You can see where you are, what you're doing next. If there's a timer, you can start it right on your iPad or Samsung tablet in the fume hood. And as you're going through the experiment, if you change anything on that particular day, you can click edit and say, today I did it at 6 degrees instead of 4 degrees. And you have, once you save it, you have a record of how exactly you ran that protocol on that particular day. You're not changing the underlying technique, but you are changing the runtime record of that protocol, so you can come back to it after 6 months and see exactly what you did on that particular day. You can export these, put them into your electronic lab notebook, or print it out, put it into your physical lab notebook. We're not restrictive in terms of where it goes. All right, and the other part that I wanted to show, let's go back to the welcome page. The other part that I wanted to show, this was the protocol itself and functionality around the protocols and what makes them. I didn't go through everything. You can include videos inside steps, tables with formulas. We try to give you really all of the resources that you need to capture the components that are critical for someone else or for yourself to repeat the work and to follow the protocol in the future. So there's a lot that I'm not covering, but I did want to switch now from the public side to how your protocols internally are organized on protocols.io. So if you go to the file manager here, or if you already have an account and you just sign in to protocols.io, you'll end up in a space that looks like this. So this is the organization. We call these workspaces. And workspace can be just one member, just yourself, where you organize your protocols, create folders, subfolders, and every protocol or file that you put into protocols.io has to live in a workspace. You can have a workspace of a large community with hundreds of members. You can have a workspace just for yourself. And from the thousands of workspaces that are on protocols.io, I think The most common one is a workspace for an entire lab, split up by projects within the lab in terms of the folders and subfolders inside, or it could be organized as in here with protocols that are in development, archived, the ones that are approved, tested, and reliable. But these workspaces are great for a company or research team in academia to organize all of the knowledge, all of the methods, so you're not looking through individual lab notebooks, so you're not emailing former members of the lab to ask exactly how did you do it before you graduated from the university. So this is a workspace. You will notice that it's not just, so here's a protocol that if you click a new button, you can create a new technique, a new protocol, but you'll notice that it's not just protocol records. Here is a PDF. And I mention this because for new users, if you already have 40 existing PDFs or Word documents and you don't have time to put them all into protocols.io as those interactive, fully featured methods, you can actually take a zip file or take the individual PDFs and you can drag and drop them into the right folders. Here you have the upload files button. And so you can take existing protocols and very quickly get them into shared space for the entire research team. So at least they're there. And then if you need to share them publicly, if you want credit for them, you can come back, you can add the more detailed records. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the options for importing existing protocols if your organization has a site license. But this private space, I mentioned that the public protocols are free to read, free to publish. The private side is the side that is paid for. So when you create a workspace, your workspace will be limited to 5 free private protocols unless your organization has premium, and we'll talk in a second about how to check if you do have premium. So you'll be limited to 5 free private protocols. If you try to create a 6th one, you either need to subscribe or you need to make one of your 5 free ones public, and then you have space for more private ones. If you're in a free space, you'll have an upgrade button right here, and that's where you can click and check organizations. I'll show you another place where you can see if your organization has a site license. If you're at the University of California or Princeton, University of Rochester, one of the many schools that have a site license, you'd click progress, you'd click upgrade, and then select your organization from the drop-down list, verify your email, and you will upgrade your workspaces to premium and not have any limits in that case. There will be a link in the slides to this, but if you want to check whether your organization has a site license, on protocols.io/institutions in the middle of the page, we have check if you're premium. And so you can see here's the full list of current campuses and organizations and universities that have a protocols.io site license. If you click on it, it'll take you to the instructions on how to become premium, what I was just talking about, and there is that upgrade now button. For most of these, if you're using the university email, and it's rochester.edu that you sign in with and create the account, you'll be upgraded to premium automatically. But if you're using Orchid or Gmail, we don't know which university you're from, you would need to go through this upgrade, select your organization, and then verify your email account. Are you at Carnegie Mellon or one of the UC schools? And then it will upgrade to premium. An important thing that I want to mention regarding the existing protocols is that if you're part of an organization that has a site license, you can navigate to We Enter Protocols. I mean, everybody can navigate here. And if you have an existing protocol that you're trying to format and share publicly, and it's very long and it would take you, half an hour or an hour to do, you can actually go to protocols.io. We enter protocols. Again, there'll be a link to it in the slides. And you can send us the protocol, and we have editorial service that means one editor will put in your protocol, another editor will check it to make sure that there are no errors, and then we privately reassign it to you. It's usually a paid service, but if you're part of one of the universities or organizations with a site license, you'll have a code to put in, and that becomes free for you. So you can easily get existing methods into protocols.io. And before I open up to questions, I also wanted to show an example of a workspace that would have the same file manager view, but not just on the private side, but what a public, visible to all workspace looks like. So this is an example of one of the many public workspaces. Just like a protocol can be public or private, our workspaces can be visible or invisible. And if it's invisible, it's obviously by invitation only. If you create a public workspace, here's an example where there are almost 200 publications, over 500 members. And what's nice about this is that when you add a new protocol, you're giving it to the community of users who would appreciate your method. When you have questions that you ask, you can go to the discussions, kind of like instead of just asking in general on Twitter or on ResearchGate, you can ask the question to the community of people that are working with similar techniques. And if you're part of such a community, all updates to the protocols, all new versions, all additions, and all the discussions that are happening, there's a digest that goes to all of the members twice a week. So it's a way to stay up to speed on new developments, on improvements to the methods that you're using, and have a method-focused collaborative space where you can have these discussions and share the methods and make them more discoverable and useful for everyone. So when you come to protocols.io, if you're in the file manager, you can search your own protocols, but on the left-hand side, there is a general search for protocols.io. And you can either search publications, or you can take a look at existing workspaces, public workspaces on protocols.io, and you can see many of them are free for everyone to join. I'm already a member of this one, but here's another example of over 200 publications, over 500 members. Some of you are from an organization with a funder, or a government agency that actually has an umbrella workspace. It can be private, but they want you to share methods internally within the company or organization. And you'll find that those workspaces on your left-hand side, and that it's very similar. You have, you have a similar page just for the members of the workspace, so it wouldn't be available publicly, but you'd have all the same functionality, plus the workspace folders where you can share the methods. But again, that would be a private collaborative space that every workspace has to organize the discussions, members, and publications and resources that are relevant to your team or your community. And we are now at the half-hour mark. So just in 30 seconds, the only other thing I wanted to say is that Protocols.io should save you time if you're using it as you're doing the research. And one of the nice things is that if you already have your protocols in protocols.io long before your paper is ready, when you're trying to publish, if you're in academia and you do publish, protocols.io will make your life easier because there's so many journals that recommend protocols.io. It makes it easier to write your method section. It doesn't remove the need for a method section, but Here's a good example of one of the many papers that link to protocols.io, and you can see when you come to materials and methods, it says the methods and protocols used in this paper for media, rearing of the flies, and microbial manipulations are available as a collection on protocols.io, and all of the precise details are shared as, I think, 10 different protocols that are part of this collection. The protocols themselves link back to the paper, and the paper links to the protocols, so you can easily navigate between them. And then if you, even after publication, going back to my original story as a postdoc, even after publication, if you have corrections or optimizations, you can't easily change the paper, but you can come in and create version 2 or 10 of your protocol, and anyone who follows the link from the published paper can see the original version, but they will also have this pop-up telling them a new version with optimizations and tweaks is available. And in terms of getting credit for your work, there are more and more method journals that you can submit your protocol to and actually get a method paper. And I want to highlight a partnership that we started last year with Public Library of Science. They created a new article type called lab protocols, where they explicitly welcome, it can be computational, it can be experimental, but so it's not just lab methods that you'll see, but they explicitly welcome protocols as method papers, as opposed to a research article, to give you more credit and make a peer-reviewed publication out of what you have on protocols.io. And then the paper that's published in +1 has the link to protocols.io and has the protocol at the center of the paper itself. And you add the introduction, discussion, references, and it goes through peer review with the layers that you expect, the extra checks and layers of context that you expect from a published paper. Here are the links to protocol entry service and how to check if your organization has a site license. And again, I didn't mean to click. And I think that is the last slide. As a reminder, in terms of resources, so here's my email. We have really good customer support at protocols.io. So if you email info@protocols.io, especially if you're at an organization that has a site license, you'll have a response usually within 24 hours. And here are the links for getting a one-on-one demo to dig into any of the more extensive functionality on protocols.io, and the link to our other regularly scheduled webinars and drop-in clinics. And this is, sorry, part 2 is from a longer version of this webinar that we've given before. It's called The Art of Writing Methods, but we're not going to be doing that now. At this point, I will stop and see if there are any questions. And because there aren't too many of us, I'm going to unmute everyone. So if you would like to speak, you are welcome to do that. Or you can put in any question into the chat. Tom, any questions? No, not yet. Again, my email is lenny@protocols.io. One frequently asked question is, for those that are at an organization with a site license, what happens if my organization doesn't renew? And the good news is, since 2019, when Carnegie Mellon became the first university to sign up for a site license, we've had many more join, and many more join every year, but we've never had a cancellation, so that's pretty good. So it's been 100% renewal, but every single enterprise contract that we have with the university or any other entity explicitly details that should a site license expire, every researcher, every workspace, you continue having access to it. You will not lose access to your existing protocols. You can always export them easily, send them to your computer as a PDF, send them to Google Drive or Open Science Framework or some of the other cloud services. And you will always continue to have access to your protocols. What changes is if you're over the 5 protocol free limit, then you have access to your existing protocols. But if you try to create more private ones, we'll ask you to either subscribe for that specific workspace or to make some of your protocols public. But you're not suddenly going to be locked in and losing access to your existing protocols. And we do have some questions. So one question is, great initiative. What is the ownership of protocols.io? So we have a whole section on this in our FAQ. It's called Can I Trust Your Organization? We are for profit, but most of our funding comes, there's some from individual investors. Genetic Society of America and EBSCO Information Services has invested in protocols.io. But most of our funding actually comes from grants from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. And the business model of free public, pay for private is what allows us to move towards sustainability. We're not quite there yet, but we've been making really good progress since 2019 towards that. But we do make all of this information public and very easy to find on our /help in the FAQs. And then there's a question, when you have a premium account, can you discover all of the protocols from your organization, both private and public? The answer is no. So for example, at the FDA or USDA, you have a site license, but you can create a workspace just for your team. There will be, at the USDA, there is another workspace where you're expected to share protocols with everyone when they're ready, but you do have your own private workspaces. And so inside the file manager, when you do a search, you can either search a specific workspace or all of the workspaces that you're a member of, but you don't by default, if you're in UC Berkeley, you don't by default have access to all of the other, to the protocols of all of the other labs. You have to be invited and you have to be part of their workspace. But that's a very good question. Then there's a question, I didn't like the printed version. It was widely spaced, small font lines. So that's the PDF export. And it says, my test protocol, which would fit on a half page as a standard operating procedure, printed out as a 2-page document. So there is expansion. The readability and expanding into PDF is not trivial. We did put a fair amount of work into this, but the response to this would be, actually, if you email us at info@protocols.io, if you share with us a private link to the protocol, we can take a look at how it's exporting, and if we can improve our PDF export. We have a very dedicated, talented team of engineers. We have a weekly brainstorming meeting on what to improve, what other features to add. So we're constantly listening to users like you, and this type of feedback, I'm screenshotting it right now, but this type of feedback is invaluable to us. We very much welcome it, and please don't hesitate to send things like this to info@protocols.io because it really helps us to improve the service. Next question is, are you integrated into any electronic notebooks? So we do have a public API, and we really welcome integrations with other services. It's a very well documented API that allows others to connect. At the moment, there are 2 electronic lab notebooks, RSpace and SciNote, that have used our API to connect from the lab notebook to allow you to pull in your protocols into the lab notebook. There is another, it's under non-disclosure agreement, so we should be announcing another integration with a popular lab notebook that many scientists use in July or August. But obviously, there is such a long list of ELNs that scientists use that we're not integrated with all of them. We welcome those integrations, but from our side, we try to make it easy for you to export to different cloud services, or to just with a click of a button, take all of your protocols in the workspace in a particular folder, export them, and then put them into the lab notebook directly. And we have some other questions in the chat. Oh, there was a question from Michelle. There was a question, I missed the beginning. Did you get private equity or grant funds to develop this? And the answer is both. And the idea for protocols was 2012. 2013 is when we had some seed funding and started building it. I left my postdoc to do it full time, and I have a super talented co-founder who is the CTO of protocols, Alexei. And we've been since 2013 working on improving it and making it better and better. But that's why that feedback is welcome. And in terms of the grant funding or private equity, the answer is both. And as I said, that's on our help page. All right, and still have 2 minutes. Please play with the platform. Grigor, your feedback is superb. As you have more, please share it with us. And anyone else, if you're new to the platform, don't hesitate to email us questions. And if you have any suggestions or feedback or requests, we really warmly welcome those. And at this point, I'll stop the recording.